So the next section of this chapter focuses on electrolytes in your body and the important functions that they serve. Now you have a variety of electrolytes in your body, but they all in general serve four different functions, four general functions. The first, as we've just demonstrated in the previous section, they're important in establishing the osmotic concentration, the concentration of your body fluids and the osmolarity of your body fluids as it relates to the movement of solutes and water between compartments. So maintaining the osmotic balance of all of your body fluids. Okay. Next, if we're talking specifically about bicarbonate and hydrogen ions, and indirectly potassium and some other ions, they become important in maintaining acid-base balance, which of course is required for a variety of cellular activities, for a variety of chemical reactions to occur, and to maintain the structure and function of your proteins within your body. As we saw or reviewed, I guess, in heart, and as you recall from ANP1, there are a variety of electrolytes that are important in neurotransmission and action potentials and electrical signaling. So with that in mind, of course, electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and chloride are all very important in that function. Finally, we saw the importance of this in blood clotting with calcium, but there are a variety of electrolytes that are important as cofactors for a variety of chemical reactions. Again, we saw how important calcium was to blood clotting. You'll see that a variety of the intracellular biochemical pathways require magnesium as an electrolyte, and we'll see that here when we talk about our specific electrolytes. Now, one of the things you're going to notice is that we can't really just reference electrolytes based on their concentration. And this is because electrolytes have two components to their, where they're found and their concentration. So we can't just talk about the amount of sodium in our blood or the amount of calcium in our blood. We also have to reference the fact that these electrolytes have charges to them. Because not only do electrolytes move according to a concentration gradient, but they also have the potential to move around according to an electrical gradient. So if we move a bunch of sodium around, we're going to create a unequal balance of charges, which is going to create the need for other electrolytes to move. So because of this, when we talk about the concentration of electrolytes, we not only reference the concentration of the solute specifically, but also its charge. And when talking about it this way, we're referencing milliequivalents. Milliequivalents per liter is the primary method of demonstrating or describing the concentration of solutes according to their location. Now, there are about 9 different solutes that are worth mentioning, and we'll focus on the more important ones here. But what I want you to notice is, in general, these solutes are either intracellular solutes or extracellular solutes. Now, the extracellular solutes, we'll go ahead and highlight these in yellow. The extracellular solutes include sodium, chloride, calcium, and for the most part, bicarbonate. Now, the intracellular solutes include potassium, magnesium, phosphates, and sulfites. Now, the oddball is, of course, your protein anions. Proteins are known to lose hydrogen ions and tend to have a negative charge to them. Now, you'll notice that we have a fair amount in the plasma and a fair amount inside of your cells, but hardly any in the interstitial fluid. Well, the reason is proteins are really big and they have difficulty moving between compartments. So in the blood, we have your plasma proteins, and in the cells, we have our intracellular proteins. But typically, they cannot leave their designated areas, which is why the interstitial fluid has very little. So let's go ahead and take a look at each of our electrolytes, starting first with sodium. So sodium is the most abundant extracellular ion. Whether you're positive, whether you're negative, sodium is the big guy. It is the most abundant extracellular ion, and it accounts for about 1/2 or 50% of the osmolarity of your extracellular fluid. Of course, in most diets, particularly American diets, the amount of sodium we take in far exceeds what's actually needed. As such, we have a variety of hormones that regulate sodium balance, in particular aldosterone and ANP. Aldosterone, as you saw previously, is going to be used when sodium levels are too low and we need to conserve it. ANP, of course, is going to be employed when we have excess sodium and we need to excrete it. Now, there are a variety of problems that result when sodium levels are not maintained within normal levels. This is referred to as hypernatremia and hyponatremia. Now, the normal concentration for sodium in the blood is about 136 to 148 milliequivalents per liter. Okay. Again, when you're below that, we're hyponatremia. When we're above that, hypernatremia. Now, there are a handful of these electrolytes that I do expect you to be familiar with the abnormalities associated with them if you are too low or too high. And this can be found in table 27.2. And knowing the symptoms associated with hypo and hypernatremia is something that I expect you to know. Now, sodium's bosom buddy is, of course, chloride. It is the most prevalent extracellular anion. Anion, of course, being a negatively charged ion. Chloride itself easily moves between compartments because most cells have chloride leakage channels. Because of its ease of moving between cells, it becomes very important in balancing our anions to ensure that we have a balance of charges. Because remember what I had said previously, when we move electrolytes around, we need to ensure that we not only worry about the concentration of our solutes, but also the charges that accompany them. So when it comes to maintaining the balance of charge, chloride becomes very important in that when we need to balance the movement of positives with a negative. Now, we typically don't focus directly on the on chloride regulation because we know that basically when we regulate sodium, chloride gets regulated right along with it. As far as chloride's important functions, we saw the importance of it in both the urinary system and in the blood as a use as an antiporter in the chloride shift when we were in particular moving bicarbonate around. Chloride is also important in the formation of hydrochloric acid in your stomach. Now, in terms of chloride, its normal range is about 95 to 105 milliequivalents. And again, refer to table 27.2 for the symptoms associated with imbalances, which would be hyperchloremia if you have too much and hypochloremia if you don't have enough. Potassium is the next big guy out there, very important. Potassium is arguably the most abundant intracellular anion, so we're going inside the cell on this one. Potassium has a variety of important functions, some of which you should already be familiar with, as we saw its use in establishing the resting membrane potential in ANP1, and then how it was used to exclusively repolarize nerve and muscle cells. It also becomes important in acid-base balance because it becomes exchanged for hydrogen ions that are getting moved around when we're trying to balance pH. And we need to balance out that positive charge. In fact, a side effect of hypo and hyper phosphatemia is associated with is often associated with pH imbalances. Now, as far as the regulation of potassium, it is done via aldosterone, as you recall, which stimulates the excretion of potassium into the urine. And since potassium is not meant to be found in the extracellular fluid, this is why we want to excrete it when levels are above normal. Now, in this case, your abnormalities is hyper and hypokalemia with a K. And remember, these guys are typically found, that potassium is not meant to be found in the extracellular fluid, so its values are typically very low, between 3.5 and 5 milliequivalents per liter. Again, refer to table 27.2 for additional information about imbalances. Well, as you saw from the table, bicarbonate was pretty much found everywhere. And that's because anytime you have CO2, you're going to create carbonic acid, which is going to dissociate into bicarbonate. And this is why bicarbonate is a pretty universal electrolyte that's found distributed in all compartments. As you'll see, as you saw introduced in the respiratory system, and as you'll see shortly, as we revisit the concept, bicarbonate is an extremely important regulator or buffer of your acid-base balance. Concentrations tend to increase in blood, and that has to traveling through your systemic tissues. This is, of course, because in your systemic tissues you're picking up carbon dioxide, which is being converted into carbonic acid and bicarbonate. And then, of course, those bicarbonate concentrations decrease as we travel through pulmonary capillaries, and it's converted back to CO2 in order to be expelled from the body. Now, in our body, we can regulate bicarbonate via the respiratory system, but more importantly and more robustly via your kidneys. As you saw previously, the kidneys are important or responsible for the reabsorption of bicarbonate and the excretion of potassium, or not potassium, excuse me, hydrogen ions. And this, the amount of which the kidneys do will, of course, depend on the levels in the blood. In particular, the intercalated cells in the kidneys are very important in this. Calcium, very important cation, in this case most abundant in the body, and that is, of course, due to its presence in bone and teeth. Now, this is not to be confused with sodium, which is the most abundant electrolyte in your extracellular fluids. Calcium is the most abundant ion or electrolyte in your body as a whole because of its component in teeth. Now, calcium is measured in two ways in the blood. It's 9 to 10.5 milligrams per deciliter, or in its ionized state, we use the milliequivalents of 4.5 to 5.5 milliequivalents per liter. Now, calcium has a variety of very important functions that you do need to be familiar with. And of course, a lot of people jump to the importance of it in bone and teeth. And it is an important structural component, but its levels in the blood are more essential for regulating cardiac activity, muscle activity, and nerve activity. Recall throughout AMP1 and 2, we saw the importance of calcium in the release of neurotransmitters, in the muscle contraction process, in the nerve and muscle function as it related to graded potentials and action potentials, and of course in blood clotting. So although, yes, calcium is important for strong bones and strong teeth, it's more important that your heart function properly, which, of course, will only occur if calcium levels are maintained within your blood. Now, calcium levels are regulated by parathyroid hormone, which is responsible for increasing blood calcium levels when they are too low. And, of course, calcitonin which is responsible for decreasing blood calcium levels when they are too high. Now, with the parathyroid hormone, as you recall, it's going to stimulate osteoclast activity to break down bone and release that calcium into the blood. It also targets your kidneys to stimulate calcium reabsorption, putting that calcium from the urine back into the blood. And finally, release calcitriol from your kidneys to stimulate the absorption of calcium from our gut. Calcitonin, on the other hand, does the opposite. It's going to stimulate osteoblast activity in your bones to create or stimulate bone formation, and it's going to stop the reabsorption of calcium from your kidneys in order to not conserve calcium when it is in excess. Now, in this case, we have hypercalcemia and hypocalcemia, which, of course, I want you to be familiar with those abnormalities. And that gives you a total of 4 of the electrolytes that I expect you to be familiar with in terms of high and low symptoms of hyper and hypo levels in the blood. Magnesium brings us back intracellularly. Magnesium is a primary intracellular cation that's involved in the activation of several biochemical pathways, being a very important enzyme cofactor, particularly for biochemical pathways involving carbohydrate metabolism and protein metabolism, as well as its importance in the operation of your sodium-potassium pump. It's also important to neuromuscular activity, nerve transmission, and overall central nervous system functioning, as well as myocardial functioning. So, magnesium, an important electrolyte. Phosphates, again, a very important intracellular buffer. Typically found in 2 ways. It can be found as a structural component, particularly to bone and teeth, as phosphate or PO4 2- likes to form salts in the presence of calcium. Calcium phosphate is an important calcium salt that's used in the creation of bone and teeth. It's also an important intracellular anion as it functions as a part of DNA. It's a component to your phospholipid bilayer, and it's also important in the formation of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So phosphate is a pretty diverse and important electrolyte. And you'll see here shortly that your phosphates will also help with the buffering of hydrogen ions in intracellular fluid and urine. Now, uniquely enough, because phosphate levels in the blood are linked to calcium levels, since calcium is stored in high concentrations as calcium phosphate, we see that parathyroid hormone also helps regulate phosphate levels in the blood. When PTH starts to break down bone and release both calcium and phosphate into the blood, PTH will actually excrete phosphate from your kidneys in order to maintain adequate levels in your plasma. So let's see how well we've done with a few do you get it questions, and as you have familiarized yourself with these electrolytes. So let's see if you can come up with the correct answer. Pause, take a second if you need to come up with the right answer. This electrolyte is the most abundant extracellular anion, important in the formation of stomach acid, and helps balance negative charges across compartments. Well, kind of made it hard on you here, right? Because they're all negative. But hopefully stomach acid should be the key, because stomach acid is hydrochloric acid. So that means D is correct. So another one here. Pause if you need to as you read this question and come up with your answer. Which of the following electrolytes is an important structural component to a cell and also acts as an intracellular buffer? Well, most students will end up choosing between B and C because they know both are buffers. But the key here is only one of them is a structural component to the cell. And I'll give you a hint. How about your phospholipid bilayer? Well, that should lean you towards B.
So that is it for section 2. The third section is acid-base, which we'll come back and finish here shortly.